In 2004, J14 magazine was huge. I knew this not because I went out and bought them religiously, but because my older sister did. I was 10, going on 11, and a boy. No way could I go out and buy a copy of J14 magazine myself. What was I? Gay? Anyway, my sister loved these and all the other magazines aimed at tween and teen girls of the time, but J14 rose above the rest for me. And no, definitely not because of its fold out posters of Chad Michael Murray and Orlando Bloom and Jake Gyllenhaal. Guys, by the way, that I was totally looking at too long only because I admired their body of work on film. Their bodies of work on film. That was the only reason. For real though, more than the fold outs, I was always drawn to the movie section of these magazines. I would kindly ask my sister if I could take a look once she was done perusing the latest issue, and I would almost immediately go to the movie section. They would have like a little summary, who was in the movie, and then at the very bottom, they would have what I guess we would call today emojis that would sort of classify the genre of each film. So, like, they had a tissue box if the movie was a tearjerker. They would have the ghost face mask. If it was like a horror movie, a scary movie, like they had it all. And I really wish that I had a copy of an issue to show, but like the girls that know, like when you were there, you know what I'm talking about. So one emoji that always stuck out to me though was the pink shoe. If a movie had this pink shoe next to it, that meant that that movie was a chick flick. I saw this pink shoe next to many movies that I was actually pretty interested in seeing, but I always kept that to myself. Why? Well, the pink shoe said it all. These were movies that were fun and pink and silly for girls. None of that context, though, was apparent to me at the time. I just saw a movie that was interesting, that looked interesting to me, but because it had that little pink shoe, I I stayed away from it because if I saw a movie that had the pink little shoe or had any sort of pink girly associations, that led to questions and accusations about me being gay. And all of those things at the time were just things that I was not supposed to be. So I stayed away from movies like this. So when movies like 13 Going on 30, Mean Girls, and A Cinderella Story were all released in theaters during the spring and summer of 2004, in addition to other movies like The Notebook and Sleepover, also branded as chick flicks, I didn't go and see them. Instead, I heard about them secondhand. And while, of course, I saw Mean Girls like every millennial did, and A Cinderella Story became a stone cold classic in my household, I always felt like there was something more drawing me to these films. This video is my attempt at explaining that something more, which, enough with the euphemisms, it's queerness. We're going to be talking about queerness in 2004 chick flicks, looking specifically at Mean Girls, 13 Going on 30, and A Cinderella Story. And I have to say, like, I wasn't planning for this to align, but like the boy band, like style and blondness of my hair is so perfectly appropriate for this era and what we're going to be talking about. I'm very psyched for this. Before we dive into each film, a bit more about the phrase chick flick. Generally speaking, a chick flick has come to be known as a film for girls and or women. What does that mean? Well, that idea has come to take many forms. Its exact origins are a bit shaky. This article from MTV News, published in 2015, cites a writer from Bergen County Record who first used the term in 1988 to describe movies that feature women and quote unquote heavily erotic elements. By time we get to 2004, however, chick flick has taken on a new connotation, becoming more tightly linked to romantic comedies, which in this era are almost exclusively marketed toward young girls and women. The age demographic may have shifted, but the dismissal of these films and the misogyny, conscious or unconscious, surrounding discussions of these films remained. These are movies that reviewers, even when complimenting them as a whole, manage to throw in some derisive way to label them as quote unquote cotton candy fluff, a quote unquote light breeze that's perfect for 12-year-old girls. Check out this review of Mean Girls by Roger Ebert, who manages to talk down to the film's presumed audience within the first paragraph. So, despite what critics and just older adults of the time may have had to say about these movies, they connected not just with their young girl audience, but with another demographic as well. Yes, there was another set of youth that glommed on to these chick flicks, and I am, of course, talking about the baby gays, who inexplicably connected with the feminine energy that these films exuded and wanted to celebrate and maybe also take part in that celebration of unabashed femininity. Let's dive in, shall we? It seems only right to start our journey at North Shore High. And in case you need a refresher, or if you have never seen Mean Girls 2004 or Mean Girls 2024, which isn't a remake of Mean Girls 2004, but a film version of the 2018 Broadway music. Okay, no. Nope. We do not have time to get into all that. Not yet, anyway. Mean Girls follows Katie Heron, who begins public school in an Illinois suburb after being homeschooled in Africa for her entire life. As played by Lindsay Lohan, Katie is earnestly clueless as she tries to navigate the wild terrain of high school in America. She finds friends in art freaks Janice and Damien, but she also finds friends in the Plastics, a triad of girls who rule the school. Their queen bee is Regina George, whose sheet thin, sweet surface barely conceals the malice underneath. Katie, along with Janice and Damien, scheme to knock Regina off her throne. Hijinks and iconic one liners ensue. Of course, the most overtly queer character in Mean Girls is Damien, who, with Janice Ian, become Katie's first friends at North Shore High. Within his first minute on screen, Damien's introduced by Janice as almost too gay to function, which on the surface might seem a bit callous, but really it's the sly piece of dialogue that encompasses the film's brand of humor while also making a plain statement. We know what you're thinking, and yes, Damien's gay. Next question. It's an element to the character that Daniel Franzese, who played Damien, immediately picked up on and appreciated about the character. In an interview with Them for the film's 15th anniversary, Franzese noted that for him, Damien was, quote, the first gay role I saw where the character was just comfortable being himself, and there wasn't too much focus on his being gay. He was able to just survive and thrive as whoever he was authentically. You just knew he was gay. You knew Janice knew, but other than that, it was just kind of like, my sexuality is something I'm going to check out after school. End quote. Franzese, who would eventually come out as gay but was not out during the production of Mean Girls, recalls it being quote unquote nerve wracking to portray a character as unabashedly queer as Damien. And despite the iconic status of the character and Franzese's performance, it, perhaps inevitably given that this was the early 2000s, stalled his career for quite some time. Franzese says that he, quote, kept hitting the gay glass ceiling, end quote, post Mean Girls. He continues, quote, they wouldn't let me audition for straight roles. I had become famous for playing one thing, and Hollywood, a very what have you done for me lately town, just didn't think my talent could go beyond that, end quote. Despite this, Franzese felt the role was special enough to weather any future pigeonholing that would occur. He says, it was so funny and well written that I didn't care. If I was going to do a gay role, it was going to be this one. End quote. And thankfully, he did. Franzese is a total natural, creating an authentic gay character at a time where there weren't many. Damien was definitely the first positive representation of a gay character I remember seeing. And though he wasn't out when filming Mean Girls, it's wonderful to see a queer actor portray a queer character, especially given that, again, this was 2004, and if there were any prominent queer roles in media, they were mostly played by straight or straight presenting actors. A fun added bonus is that while Damien may be the only outwardly queer character in the film, Franzese is not the only one of its actors to come out as gay. Jonathan Bennett, who plays Katie's love interest Aaron Samuels, and Rajiv Surendra, who plays mathlete slash rapper Kevin Napur, have both since come out as gay. Apparently, Franzese and Bennett used to go out to gay clubs together while filming, and honestly, where is that Mean Girls spinoff? Okay, so I spent a lot of time talking about Mean Girls' queer legacy as it relates to Damien, but depending on who you talk to, there's at least one, possibly two, more queer characters.
To hang out with Kyle, she'd be like, why didn't you call me back? And I'd be like, why are you so obsessed with me?
Regina, of course, is talking about Janice Ian. The two girls used to be friends, but that ended due to Janice's apparent obsession with Regina, an obsession that Regina equates with her supposed lesbianism. Janice's perceived queerness is also addressed in the Plastics Burn book, in which they refer to Janice using a certain choice word. Unlike the too gay to function proclamation we got about Damien, whether or not Janice is in fact a lesbian is never clearly addressed. What's clear is that her eventual pairing with Kevin Napur is meant to set the record, well, straight, I guess, when it comes to Janice's sexuality. But speculation around Janice's sexuality seems to have been intrinsically tied to speculation around Regina's sexuality as well, which is something I'll admit I wasn't truly aware of until the last few years. But now, even doing a simple internet search of the two characters' names, along with words like gay or lesbian, will bring up a series of articles and fan fiction, lots of fan fiction, centered on Regina and Janice. Now, any ambiguity about Janice's sexuality in the 2004 film was cleared up by the 2004 movie musical adaptation. Told you we were coming back to this. This version's Janice, played by Aliui Caravaggio, is explicitly queer, her rift with Regina specifically tied to her queerness. She even has a queer coded date during the film's climactic spring fling scene. And as for Regina, well, in this version, she's not explicitly queer, but that didn't stop her portrayer, openly bisexual singer actress Renee Rapp, who also played the role on Broadway, from playing her as such. In several interviews promoting the film, Rapp says that, quote, Regina being a lesbian was always my interpretation of it, still is my interpretation of it. It might not be other people's, and I truly don't care. It's mine, and that's how I feel. End quote. And what about Damien in this 2024 version? Well, as played by another Broadway star, Jaquel Spivey, he's still gay, and he's functioning just fine. So 13 Going on 30 was the one movie in my trifecta that I was not as familiar with before making this video. And by that, I mean I'd seen it maybe twice beforehand compared to like the dozens of times I've seen Mean Girls and A Cinderella Story. So I even had Sleepover and another Lindsay Lohan classic, Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen, lined up just in case I watched 13 Going on 30 and found that there was zero queerness to be detected. Well, then I turned this on and was immediately put at ease. I don't want to be beautiful in my own way. I want to look like them, says our protagonist, Jenna Rink, gesturing to the gorgeous models gracing the pages of fashion magazine Poise. It's 1987, and Jenna is a 13-year-old who wants two things: to fit in with the clique of cool girls in her class, the Six, and to be quote unquote 30, flirty, and thriving. Jenna gets her wish for the latter, thanks to some literal wishing dust. She becomes a 30-year-old embodied by the sublime Jennifer Garner, who's seemingly living her best life in New York City, with a hot jock boyfriend and serving as an editor at Poise. After tracking down her childhood bestie Matt, played by the gorgeous Mark Ruffalo, Jenna must navigate her new normal and decide if the life her 30-year-old self has made is one worth living. So, what exactly about this premise is queer? Honestly, you can make an argument for a lot, but what jumped out to me immediately was Jenna's wish to be 30, flirty, and thriving. Obviously, Jenna's just a kid when she has this desire and doesn't fully understand the scope of being a grown up. All she knows is that she's been unfairly singled out as an outcast by her school's popular girls. And the magazine that she worships is telling her through its images that your life will be infinitely better when you're older, more attractive, and successful. This idea isn't something that on the surface seems very LGBTQ coded, but watching this movie again and seeing how it actualizes this 30, flirty, and thriving wish that Jenna has, I cannot help but be transported myself back to my grad school days and reading the work of the scholar Scott Herring, who has written some fascinating stuff in the queer studies field. And with that being said, come with me down the queer studies rabbit hole. In his book, Another Country: Queer Anti-Urbanism, Herring contends with the concept of queer urbanism, which, quote, codifies the metropolitan as the terminus of queer world making as many have come to know it, end quote. Herring goes on to say urbanism has held that, quote, cities like New York or San Francisco or Los Angeles or Chicago or London or Berlin or Paris or Mexico City have too often been the distant reference point for non urban identified queers, end quote. And look, Jenna hardly lives in a rural area. She was raised in New Jersey, a train ride away from the Big Apple. But what Herring unpacks holds water here. Jenna's yearning to leave behind conformist suburbia for a new, seemingly better life in the big city feels very queer coded. I mean, this is definitely a life trajectory that I always fantasized about. And honestly, it's one that I still think about even to this day as a 30-year-old myself. If I could just pack up, leave my life behind as is, and start fresh in a new big city. For me, it's always been Chicago. But leaving what I have now and going somewhere new so I can live that big gay lifestyle that I've always dreamed of. That idea has always been there, but like Jenna learns in the movie, we all know that as we grow up that idea of a perfectly packaged life is a complicated one, and one that comes with baggage that we don't realize when we're younger. And outside of the queerness wrapped up in Jenna's wish, I found myself struck at how the movie's premise sets up Jenna's coming of age journey. She's physically 30 for most of the movie, with the mind and memories of her 13-year-old self. And yeah, there are some weird narrative implications people have rightfully gotten into related to this premise, but what grabbed me about it here is this idea of a second coming of age queer people often have once they've come out. Yes, they're still the same person, but the way they navigate the world, hopefully more freely, is completely different. The way Jenna fumbles through her new normal, expertly played by Garner, by the way, in a way mirrors that of baby gays trying to find their own footing in the world. 13 Going on 30 is at its core a story about finding and happily embracing one's identity, a narrative that lends itself well to the queer experience. But what about a story that deals with concealing one's identity? You know, when you watch a movie and you're like, wow, I am so happy to be LGBTQ? That's basically me every time I watch a Cinderella story. So, if you're familiar with the story of the Cinderella, then you'll be familiar with this movie's plot beats, which are updated for the early aughts. Our Cinderella here is Sam Montgomery, played by another early aughts idol, Hilary Duff. Sam's kingdom is the San Fernando Valley, where she lives happily with her father. When he dies tragically during an earthquake, Sam's life is completely upended. She's banished to the attic of her home, forced to do the bidding of her wicked stepmother, Fiona, played by the iconic Jennifer Coolidge, and her kooky stepsisters. She doesn't fare much better elsewhere. She's the tomboy, quote unquote, diner girl who exists on the fringes of her high school's social ecosystem. Sure, she has her endearing friend Carter and the supportive staff at her late father's diner, but Sam's true goal is to escape Fiona's clutches for good by attending college at Princeton. Q Nomad, the mysterious person Sam meets in a Princeton chat room. Sam and Nomad talk for hours on end, and while they vibe through text, Nomad even sends her poetry, guys! Sam's hesitant to meet Nomad in real life. As she says, quote, sometimes fantasy is better than reality, end quote. I'm going to pause in my summary here because one, this is literally a Cinderella story, so hopefully there's not much suspense as to what happens next here. And two, because we have got to talk about the anonymous chat room of it all. These faceless digital interactions between Sam and Nomad, their hesitancy to meet in person, all of this speaks directly to the queer experience in the digital age. In the article, Still Getting It On 30 Years of Queer Male Spaces Brokered Through Digital Technologies, scholar Sam Miles writes that, quote, the internet was able to act as host to online spaces of fluidity and alterity, end quote, where, in the particular case of this article anyway, gay and bisexual men could be, quote, disembodied entities, freed from the confines of geographical parameters and temporal fixicity, end quote. Obviously, Sam and Nomad, who's really hot shot jock Austin Ames, who is played by the aforementioned Chad Michael Murray, by the way, obviously they aren't queer men, but their connection is built on this foundation of anonymity that allows them to live fully in their truth without any repercussions to their real lives. As much as they want to meet and be together, doing so would disrupt the norms around them, And this is even before knowing that they each come from vastly different steps on the social ladder. The queer subtext continues beyond the anonymous convos. There's Sam and Nomad's first meeting in the most dramatic way possible on the school dance floor, with Sam in an eye mask that somehow totally conceals her identity. Not to mention Austin Ames himself, the school quarterback who's really a closeted poet. Austin has yet to find the courage to stand up to his dad, who has his son's whole life planned out for him. None of those plans include him as a Princeton going poet, obviously. Like, okay, there's this scene where Austin's dad confronts him because his dad has found, gasp, college brochures stashed away in Austin's room. Come on now. Then there's the truly horrible outing of Sam as Austin's Princeton girl in front of the entire school. That no one, not even the teachers, by the way, stops as it's happening. It's only after Sam and Austin have their individual moments of self acceptance that they can finally be together. Now, if that's not a queer love story, I don't know what is. There's truly so much more I could say about this movie to make the case for its inherent queerness, okay? Like, first of all, there's the Jennifer Coolidge of it all.
Not very pretty, and you're not very bright.
Like, hello, talk about not being fully aware of queer culture and then watching Jennifer Coolidge's performance as Fiona. Looking back on it 20 years later, you're just like, wow, like you're drawn to that and you don't know what's going on. Like, it's wild. And then there is Carter, who has his whole drama with Shelby, which is very similar to Sam and Austin's, where they hook up under these disguises. And then there's that confrontation that Carter has with Shelby by the pool. And she is just appalled that this guy she's been obsessing over is this nerd that she would never look at twice in real life, besides to copy his tests. But I mean, the queer layers of that, like, if you know, you know, okay? And while there are no canonically queer characters in this film, we do have this diva and this queen. I mean, come on now. There's also just something about this movie being the least critically acclaimed of the three that I've talked about today that to me just makes it queer canon. Um, us LGBTQ folks, we are attracted to the culture that the straights do not get. What the straights may see as trash or irrelevant, we see as masterpieces. And A Cinderella Story is just a masterpiece, plain and simple. So, does the chick flick even exist today? I'd say so, just in a different and more positive light. The misogynistic undertones of the genre, particularly as that misogyny reached a fever pitch in the early aughts, resulted in many critics calling for the chick flick phrase to be abandoned or reclaimed. And because of this reevaluation, movies released today that fit this genre are given more critical consideration than perhaps they were before. Take Bottoms, released in 2023. Now, you wouldn't even automatically think of this film as a chick flick, even as its plot does technically revolve around the lives of teenage girls. And while I see the film as more spiritually aligned with Heathers and Jawbreaker, it is similar to Mean Girls, especially in one crucial way. While that movie had Damien as its one casually queer character, Bottoms has several of those, including the two leads. By nature of having these bigger roles, multifaceted representations of queerness get to be portrayed on screen. As director and co-writer Emma Sigleyman says, quote, I feel like queer teen characters generally don't get the chance to be horny and selfish on screen. They're often portrayed in this light where they only have romantic desires, and I just could never relate to that. End quote. And Seligman's observation and the fact that bottoms even exists is a testament to how the chick flick, the women's picture, the teen comedy, whatever you want to call it, has evolved over the last 2 decades. That we can have these varied representations, not just of girlhood, but queerness too, shows how far we've come. And it's nice to know that today's filmmakers haven't forgotten and are even inspired by those who came before. Just look at some of the films Seligman lists as being on her bottom's mood board. So, I don't know, y'all. We might have to actually give it up to Gretchen. She may have actually made fetch happen. Thank you all so much for watching this video. This one, probably more so than any of my others, was truly a labor of love that I had so much fun making and so much fun experimenting with. So if you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you would like to see more. Thank you so much again. I appreciate you.